What is up, guys? My name is Seba and welcome to Cloud Space with Seba. In this video, I'm going to be going through the process of Dockerizing a Node.js application, and I'm going to try and do it as quickly as I can. So in terms of definitions, Node.js is a JavaScript runtime that allows us to build and to run backend applications using JavaScript, which is normally used as a client-side language in the browser. Docker, on the other hand, is a platform that allows us to run our application as containers. Now, I believe there are many benefits to Docker, but these are the ones that really stand out for me. Number one is that it allows us to package both the application code and its dependencies into a single image that we can then run as a container. The second part I think is important, and a benefit to Docker is that it is portable, meaning that we can run our application in a number of environments. This can include things like platforms like EKS, which is managed Kubernetes on AWS, or we could use something like ECS, which itself is also an container orchestration platform, also on AWS, or we could run it in EC2, for example. Now, I wouldn't really go for the third option, which is EC2, because it implies that we then have to manage the containers really ourselves. So let's get started. Now, if you notice on the screen, I already have an Express JS API. It's very simple. There's nothing complicated about it. In fact, we only just have a app.js file, and in that we essentially have instead brought in Express and set up things like the ports and a single route, and then we're listening on that port as well. So what we're going to do now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Docker ignore file. And essentially what the Docker ignore file is going to do, in there we're going to list either some files or some folders that we don't want to be made a part of our image. And so the first one that I usually put on here is the Node modules folder. And as you know, if you come from the Node.js world, that is where we have our packages stored. The next file that I'm going to have on here is the Dockerfile itself. I don't want it to be part of the image. Now, obviously, we haven't created that, and that is exactly what I'm going to do now. So we're going to create the Docker file. Now, inside of the Docker file, we're going to have a set of commands that are really going to be what Docker then uses sequentially to then build an image for this application. Now, the first command we're going to have is the from command, and really the from command allows Docker to go into Docker Hub or locally into our machine if we have the image to go and pull that image that is going to act as the base of our image. And in our case, I'm going to use node 19 Alpine, right? And that's the base image we're going to work on. Now that we have the base image, we can then gonna do a few other things in order to build the image for our application. The second one is that we're going to use the run command, and we're going to create a directory, right? And in there, we're going to create a directory within our home directory inside of our container, and we'll call it USR app. And in there, I'm going to create the node modules folder itself. And once I'm done doing that, I'll change the ownership to node /home/USR/app, right? And essentially what we're doing is everything that is inside of this directory, which is what we've created here, so that would be the node modules folder, is going to be owned by a user called node inside of the node group. So, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create what we call is a work directory, and this is where our application is really going to live. So home/USR, as you can see on the top here, is what's going to be the home directory. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to copy the package files, right? So that would be package.json, package-log.json as well. And this is where we have our packages as well as the versions that we have them in as part of our application at the moment. So I'm going to say package, and instead of doing them one by one, I'm just going to have an asterisk here and say .json and copy them into the working directory. Now, another thing I want to do here, in order to avoid not having proper permissions, I'm just going to change the ownership to node, right? And that will allow our user node to then have the permissions to work with those files. The next thing we're going to do now is we're going to set the user to node, and this is to prevent us from using the root or administrative user within the system where we're running this container, so that we can control the permissions that the user has. Then we're going to say npm install, and this is going to install packages, everything that's on here. So if you look at the packages.json file, the only thing we have is express at the moment. So that's what would be installed. And in doing so, that will also install all of these into the node modules folder. Once we've done that, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to copy everything that is within, everything that's in this root directory. We're going to copy, and we're going to copy it into the working directory. And again, what we're going to do here is we're going to change ownership to node, giving ownership to this user again. Now, what we're going to do is, since we've copied all the files that we need, we've copied the application code, we've downloaded the dependencies, then what we're going to do now is we're going to expose port 3000. And then after exposing 3000, we'll then write the command that's going to then start our application. So I'm going to say node, and essentially inside of our directory, if you look here, the entry point of our application is the app.json file, which sits inside the src folder. And so that's what I'm going to have here. I'm just going to do that and point to that file, and so it would say node and run that file, and that would bring up our application. So now that we've done this, it's now time to test if our steps have been written correctly here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build this, and I'm going to do that by saying docker build. Okay, and I'm going to give it a tag, and what I'm going to say is I'm just going to call it node-app, and I'm going to tell it where the Dockerfile is, which happens to be in the root of this directory. So by saying dot, that's what I'm saying. I'm telling Docker, I'm telling it that it's on the root of this directory that we're working in. If it is in any other place, for example, inside of the src, then we would say /src, and it would point to that folder. So what this is going to do is that it's going to go through this file over here, line by line, and run the set of commands within that specific line. So if I hit enter, it can take a bit of a while. It just depends on whether we have the base image. In my case, I have the base image, so I'm expecting that it would be quicker than it should be quick, because I have that base image already. Then once it's seen that it has the base image, that it doesn't need to download it, then it'll go ahead and do the other commands as well. Now, often things don't work the first time, so if we run into any issues, we'll just debug together until we get to a certain point where we can be able to test and run our image as a container. So now it's on step 2 or 3. You notice that it's loaded the definition file, it's able to find it. Then it loaded the docker.ignore file, and in there you'll remember that we said that we don't want the node modules as well as the Docker file in our image, so it's going to take that into consideration. So now it's authenticating into Docker Hub, and it's now going to attempt to get that node 19 Alpine, but then it's going to notice that we obviously have that. So that's how powerful Docker is, right? In that any layers, and we can get into this concept layer of layers later, but what Docker does under the hood is that it caches these commands here, or these lines of commands here, so that the next time we need to do the same thing, if we have a cache of that specific step, it just will bring it off out from the cache. So now if we look here, we have the image, we've ran the command, it's run the command of creating the folder, it's pointed to this as the working directory, it's copied the package.json files, it's ran the commands to install the packages, it's copied things into the working directory as well as set the ownership. So now it's done. So now what we're going to do is, let me just clean this up. I'm going to say Docker So I'm going to say Docker, and I'm going to run this in detached mode and port 3000, obviously, and we're going to map that point 3000 for the container to port 3000 on our machine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to name it node-app, which obviously is going to be ran from the image node-app as well. So if I now run that, we'll be able to tell if it's going to run successfully. And if it doesn't run successfully, what we can then do is we'll look into the logs and see what's going on and be able to debug from there. So let's just give it a second here. It's taking forever. Cool. So now if you say docker ps, we'll be able to tell if our container is running or not, because it runs as a process. So that's what ps stands for. Cool. There we go. So our application, our container is running. So if you look, it was created for 54 seconds ago. It's been up for 25 of those seconds. And as you can see here, this is the port mapping, and this is the name of our container. So what we could do now is we could say docker logs, and we could say node-app. And what this will do is it'll give us the application log. So if you look at our application here, it does a console log of server running on port, whatever the port number is. So for example, in this case, it's 3000 if it doesn't find it in the environment variables. And there we go, server running on port 3000. So this is now the containerized version of the application. It's running on port 3000. In fact, what we could do is we could then say localhost 3000, and we should be able to get a response there as well. Let me just check if we've got yeah, there we go. So app is running in development mode. Right, so yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope this added some value. Just in summary, we basically built a Dockerfile, which will allow us to build our application, our Node.js application, and allow us to have an image of that, which we can then run as a container. We then tested after building our image, and now what we have on here is the running image itself, and we're able to, because we've mapped the ports between the machine and the container, are able to then run and access it from the browser. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.